of government can do. And last, just to remind folks of it's people, people, people. You know, when we talk about budgets, there's not a lot of funds that are not related to the employment of our people at the city who do a wonderful job. And this is just a quick rundown for you of percentage of the budgets that are dedicated to personnel costs. So in the controller's office, 58%. You see clerk at 85, mayor at 89, planning at 92, ITS at 71, human resources at 84, and down the list, you know, police and fire, 91 and 94% of their budget is dedicated to personnel costs. Even with Public Works Administration, where there's a lot of the utility costs and capital financing at 15%. So you look down and just off the top, it's 73% of the general fund is dedicated towards personnel costs. And when you adjust that for property tax caps and the transfer of general fund dollars, property tax dollars to support sanitation, that jumps up to 77%. And then in some of our other operating accounts, you can see 29, 58, 69, 32, and so on. So a lot of the monies that we budget are for people who are the backbone of the city. So just a reminder of that, the discretionary amounts of budgets are not nearly as great as we would think they are. With that, I will say thank you for your support in the past. We look forward to working with the council again in the development of this budget and funding those necessary and wanted services for the residents of Bloomington. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. Seeing none, we'll move on to
Oh, you just need to clear the screen. That was a good one. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Underwood and Mayor Hamilton, for this presentation. We will go around the council. Hopefully 2 rounds will be sufficient for questions or comments. And Mr. Lucas, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but any questions or comments that we generate this evening will be compiled by the council office?
Yes, and I believe the administration also mentioned a sheet that they provided to council members for you all to provide written comments after this evening as well. So if you needed some additional time to formulate those comments, please use that questionnaire, and we'll share that with the administration and post those online for all to see. So we'll take notes from this evening's comments, but any additional written comments you have will be shared after tonight.
Okay, thank you. And before we get into that portion, I do want to remind my colleagues, after talking with some of my fellow council members, we had a deadline of June 15th in order to submit questions, and that wasn't ample enough time with some of our members. So that has been extended until July 1st. That council members can submit questions, and so you have plenty of time to, plenty of time to think about it and get that done before we get into budget hearings. Okay, having said that, we'll start with Council Member Volan. And this is how I'm looking, how you're situated on my screen. Council Member Volan.
I don't have any questions at this time. I'm just listening tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Member Smith.
Thank you. Mr. Underwood, will you kind of briefly talk about reversions and what does that mean to the departments, and how does that affect services, public services, parks? Can you just kind of a little bit talk about that?
Yes, happy to. In reversions, in layman terms, are essentially if you have an approved budget of, say, $1 million and you only use $1.8 million, you are reverting back to the fund $200,000. Most of that comes from personnel. We can't always be staffed at 100%. So a lot of it comes from the category ones. But in this particular time, there were programs, I should say, that because of COVID, we couldn't do. So I wouldn't necessarily think there were services that we needed services that we didn't provide, but there were obviously services and programs that we couldn't provide. So we wouldn't need to spend the funds on those. In the case of, say, Parks and Recreation, it may have been at a more limited basis. So let's say there was a program where normally they would have 50 people and they could have 10. Obviously, the reduction in expenses, but there would also be a reduction in the revenues as well. So departments looked year long, as we entered into the pandemic, to really see where are there ways that we can save money, but still provide needed and necessary services. And I can't think of an example where there was a needed or necessary service that we weren't able to provide, at least at some level, given the constraints of the pandemic. I would say, and I had it in my notes and didn't say it when I was presenting, that in the past with reversions, the mayor has graciously allotted half of those reversions amounts back to department heads to use for programs or items that maybe they necessarily wanted to do but didn't have the funding for. However, department heads for the last 2 years have allowed those to go back into the fund to be used for that's how we've funded some of our recovered forward amounts and been able to keep our cash reserves up. So that's why I wanted to really commend department heads tonight for the great job that they've done. Because they always hear me saying no. So tonight I thumbs up and thanks so much.
Yeah, reversions I always found are a little bit, it's kind of hard to understand what impact that has on the general public and what we do. And thank you, Mr. Underwood.
Thank you. Councilmember Scambolery.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple questions. I appreciate your summary and your slide on some of the factors that are really likely to impact budget, like material costs and so forth. I also noticed fleet maintenance on that list. Are there any, I know we've made some good investments in fire protection, for example. Are there other investments we see on the horizon? Those are pretty big ticket items, I know. Are there other items being discussed right now or being considered in the next year or two?
We're reviewing that list of normal and necessary replacements. Obviously, we try to defer in these times if we can, but we try to stay out of that trap of deferred maintenance or deferred replament, because that gets us into this evil loop of we just don't have the funding then and we'll take a harder look at them this year. I don't know of any major items yet. We'll be starting to review that with departments. We just started our first round of review department heads yesterday. So we'll know more by the end of the month what departments hopefully, lit a public separate item. We anticipate that that's going to remain strong. And that's where a lot of the really large investments are. And we've done the full cycle on both police and fire. So we're in pretty good shape for there. The next one up is Public Works, and we've done a pretty good job of the big equipment, replacing that. If you'll remember, we also did a general obligations bond issues several years ago now that we were able to start replacing our sanitation vehicles to go to automation. So I think we're complete with that cycle. So I think we're in good shape there. So, and of course, utilities has their own improvement plan that they continue to do as well. So I think we're in pretty good shape. We may have to defer some, maybe a year, but I'm never a big one to say we're just not going to do that for several years, because it's just too hard to catch back up.
Right. And sooner or later, it's all going to bottleneck somewhere. So, and then just a question, I've asked this before, but several of our departments I know took a hit on revenue during the COVID pandemic. Can you provide any updates on what have we learned, which departments have been especially hard hit and might need a year to recover, and how are we approaching that, and how is that informing our discussion about the 22 budget?
Sure. It's the primary big hits have been in the what we call usage departments. People utilize their services and pay for those. Parks, parking meters, parking facilities, the garages, and as I
Gas tax.
yeah, there we go. But the street department, thank you, Mayor. As my flow of thought got derailed there. So those are the four big ones, because those are all consumption type revenues, and we just didn't have the consumption. With parks, it was a little bit less of a hit because obviously with programs they couldn't give or at a reduced level, they also saved those expenditures as well. So, we still had the fixed costs of staff and insurance and bond payments and those kinds of things. But those variable costs we were able to save. So it's, while they're down, there was an upside to that as a drop in expenses. Whereas with, streets and parking meters and parking facilities, we still have to maintain those. We still have the people, we still have the equipment. The level of service didn't drop as far as maintaining those. So those are the big four.
Great, thank you. That's what I have for now, and I'll likely have more later, but I'll pass the baton. So.
Thank you. Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. Of course, several of us have had concerns over the last couple of budget cycles with respect to public safety and the Bloomington Police Department. And so a lot of my questions will pertain to some of the pilot programs that we've attempted to relieve a bit of that. And those have included take-home cars. I understand there was some kind of housing voucher or housing allowances, but in particular, I'm going to want to know, since we've instituted some of those pilots, what are we looking at with respect to our staffing levels, our attrition rates, like through retirements, the loss of well-trained officers to other communities, and then our current recruiting efforts. And I think this is particularly important as we are looking at annexation. So those are going to be some of my biggest questions: is how are we doing? How are some of our efforts that we have attempted to try to keep from losing officers, and making sure that we have adequate staffing levels for our community as it exists now, and as it perhaps will exist post-annexation. So I don't need answers right now, but those are just things that you can anticipate when I submit my questions in writing, that I will have some primary interest in getting answers to. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Sandberg. Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. First, I just wanted to follow up briefly about reversions that Councilmember Smith talked about. The slide that displayed 2020 reversions, was that the total amount? Is that right? Or was that just some representative departments or funds?
That was representative of some of the major operating accounts. Obviously, there are other funds where we had reversions, but these were the big ones, and the big funds we typically hone in on because they're the operational type, general fund, parks and rec, street department, parking facilities, parking meter, risk management. So those departments that I talked about got hit hard, plus our operating accounts.
And like, when did we know those 2020 level reversions? Like, when did that information?
We had that in early March. Okay.
And I know you mentioned that some of it ended up being used for Recover Forward and similar initiatives. Is that was obviously a bit of a anomalous situation given the pandemic. What would be the typical avenue for reversion funds? Are they normally of this order? I think the slide quoted 5,091,000. Do we expect similar reversions from the 2021 fiscal year and 2022? So yeah, a couple of questions there, kind of about normal process and expectations.
I would think that we'll probably be in the $4 to $5 million range in the funds that we talked about. Parks may be more difficult. They were at $1.1 million. That's a record for them because their funding is so tight. on it. General fund, we've seen it usually in the $1 to $2 million range. So we were right at $2 million. So I would suspect that that'll hold the norm. Motor vehicle highway parking facilities and parking meter. I don't know that those reversions are sustainable, just for the fact that, we really had to push hard on those this year because of the lack of revenues. The parking meter has a better fund balance. So it was able to sustain that hit a little bit more, whereas parking facilities, as we all know, not a lot of cash balance. They're very expensive to maintain. We're committed to maintaining those. That's one of the things that we talked about as we sold bonds for the new ones, is that, this administration is set to try and fund those and make sure that we continue to do so. So I would think, Councilmember Flaherty, that we'll probably be somewhere the $4 million range if I were to guess for 21, because I just don't think in those, it was $1.8 million in those three funds. I'm not sure that we can do that again.
Let me just, if I may just add in a little context. So I would say they're a little higher than usual that we saw. And as Controller Underwood indicated, for the several years since I've been mayor, we've typically split those in half and let the departments essentially reuse those funds through a special appropriation the next year for projects. They saved that money, if you will. They didn't spend their budget, and rather than grab it all, we kind of said, let's let them use it for special projects, which we have not done, in part primarily because we wanted to protect our balances. When Mr. Underwood talks about Recover Forward, what we did consciously together with you was decide to invest some of our balances, which are typically funded by the reversions each year, into the Recover Forward effort. So, happily, let's call it, CARES Act and particularly ARPA, Rescue Plan Act, are going to let us have strong balances and the ability to do some one-time investments like we can do with reversions. But these were, I would say, a little bit higher than I'd experienced in the last 5 years or so, in part because of the very unusual year.
Okay, that's all really helpful. I may have more questions still, and this is a little in the weeds. I'm having a little bit of a hard time still conceptualizing exactly how the reversions get budgeted and when. So we have 2020 money that went unspent. We learn, kind of totals on those and what everything is in the various funds in March 2021. But of course, we have a 2021 budget that didn't include those dollars. Is that wrong? Am I
No, that's
already?
correct. You're exactly
Okay.
correct. They didn't include those.
Right. So, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to try to parse it a little bit. The reversion money basically just goes into the balances that you saw. Right. So they go into those balances. Typically, each year we will come to you in May or June and do a supplemental appropriation with using some of those balances and reversions. We have not done that this year because we're protecting those balances. We will be coming in July for the ARPA money, but usually they just grow the balances, and it's kind of a cycle that we expect because we never spend every dollar that you appropriate each year.
I may have more follow-ups on that eventually, but one final question, which is that for 2021 reversions, which we'll know sometime in the spring, is it expected, or do you know yet, or just what is the administration planning in terms of sharing those, half of those with, so to speak, with the departments that save the money as an incentive of sorts?
We haven't really confronted that yet. It usually depends upon how solid we feel the balances are, whether we, how much risk there is, basically.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, I am looking at the climate action plan and the goals that it sets. And one of the main implementation steps is just to build staffing capacity to further implement the more specific goals in the plan and do a lot of community outreach, since the city can't reduce greenhouse gas emissions all on its own. So is that something that you are factoring into the budget for next year? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm happy to. It's probably not a night to give a lot of feedback in detail on that. Certainly, as you heard me say, one of the two primary overlays in evaluating all of our budget is on how are we moving forward in sustainability, primarily climate responsibility and inclusion. So it is a very, very big factor to look at how the community moves forward. And as you said, now we have a climate action plan, which gives some detail to that. So happy to, hear your suggestions about specific areas for that. It's certainly an area we care a lot about and we'll be working on in the budget.
Okay. And then I guess the other main area that I want to mention right away is housing. And the Housing and Security Task Force, as we mentioned earlier in tonight's meeting, we're going to have some concrete proposals for what local government can do. And I know Councilmember Smith has proposed to use a big chunk of the ARPA funds for housing. And I think we need to, of course, ARPA is not a renewable funding stream. It's limited. So I think we need to think carefully about how can we use those funds, maybe for capital expenditures or to initiate a program that then will become financially sustainable through other means. But definitely I'm eyeing housing for very low income folks as a worthy expenditure of ARPA funds. We would need to figure out how to not create something that then has to close down in 2 years. So I guess that's not really a question either. It's just something that hopefully will be a priority for all of us.
Well, if I may, I appreciate the comment. One, absolutely, it's imperative to remember that much of the money that we're talking about here is one-time money. That was true of Recover Forward. It's true of ARPA. It's true of some of these others. So it means we have to think hard about how to be strategic with it. It's great opportunities, but you indicated some of the challenges with that we'll all be thinking about. Two, on housing, stay tuned next week. We'll be talking about that more. I think you'll find this administration will be proposing significant investments, again, sensitive to sustainability, inclusion, and the fact that a lot of this is one-time money. So we look forward to suggestions about how to do that best too.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Before we go further, and I will remind my colleagues that comments along with questions are appropriate and acceptable if that is what you choose to do to start this conversation this evening. Councilmember Rallo.
Well, in that case, I'll begin with a comment by expressing my shared concern with Councilmember Sandberg about our public safety budget, retaining and adding sworn officers, in particular, and particularly anticipating needs prior to annexation. I think with fire, there's also, I think, a long-time need anticipated for an additional station in the southwest area of the city. It was approximated around Tap Road in Weimer. And I'd like some discussion about that this year, about how we can keep pace with that need. But my question is about, Mr. Underwood, about, we've seen some fluctuations in inflation over the past months, and it's anticipated that probably we'll have higher inflation in 2023. Could you talk about that a little bit? What are you estimating? And this is not just, of course, materials costs, but as you said, because we have so much allocation of the budget to personnel, and we want to keep pace with of their salaries with inflation, probably at higher rates, 2.5 or more. Could you talk about that? And are you anticipating that as well?
Obviously, we always take that into account when we're looking at what we have control over. In this case, this year, we have all 3 unions under contract. So those amounts are set, and I covered those. We'll take a look again at the non-union folks. We try to keep them competitive with what we've given the unions as well. So yes, we will take that into account. We're very early on in the process. We're analyzing the information. As you said, we've seen some increases in inflation. Part of it will also be the extension or non-extension of unemployment benefits. So does that allow people to come back to work or not come back to work? So supply and demand on the worker side is a concern, as well as, but I think the biggest concern is what material costs are going to be. And we're having discussions with Public Works and utilities. We know that utilities has a rate case going right now that'll probably take will be effective in 2022. We're talking to Mike Rooker and our risk management folks on what insurance costs are going to be. We may see a substantial increase in those premiums just merely for the fact that material costs have gone up. We know that in the past when we've had major disasters, we've seen jumps in rates just because, again, materials are hard to come by and the prices go up. So we're early on, we're having those discussions, but all of that will be taken into account as we build this budget. And there may be some hard decisions on things that we have to decide on because costs are increasing so quickly. But we're also hoping to see that, maybe things will normalize as we kind of get through that first hump of the coming off the pandemic, that, supplies will go up and the demand will be met and pricing will come down. So we're going to continue to monitor that very closely. And it may be one of those that we just have to guess at with the budget. Sometimes that's what we have to do and pick a number. And it may be that it's not as bad. So you see it revert back, or it's worse and we have to come and ask you for some additional funds.
Could I follow up just to ask whether you consider, certainly rent increases and housing costs in general outpace CPI. Do you consider that as part of salary increases, or will you be?
Yeah, we look at all the factors that go into not just the overall, as some of the things that aren't included in the consumer price index. The normal one is we look at cost of fuel, we look at cost of housing, we look at cost of food to go along with those items that are contained in the normal CPI. Bloomington's not a cheap city to live in, and I think we've made great strides thanks to the mayor's commitment over the last 3 or 4 years to increase all of our salaries to be more competitive, both within the region, but within what the cost of living in Bloomington is. And one of those was to the police department to incentivize police officers to live in the city with down payment, rental, and take-home cars.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rollo. Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Thank you. I don't have any questions right now.
Thank you very much. First thing I'd like to say is, if we don't already have the PowerPoint presentation that you gave Mr. Underwood, can council get copies of those?
Yes, I meant to say that we would forward those along to Stephen so he can distribute it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I just have some comments. As we submit questions, or me personally, obviously some of our priorities may create increases or proposed increases, and that'll have to be tempered with suggestions for certain decreases as well. And that's one of the things I'll have to think about a lot. In order to get some increase in something, I think it's going to be very important to consider what may have to be decreased as part of the discussion. But my comment or question has to do with ARPA funds. And I know that's a one-time spend or one-time use. And as I recall, I believe the mayor or administration has said we'll use part of it this year, part of it during 2022, and then a portion of it may be planned for early 2023. So as part of this year's budget discussions, can we expect, and I don't expect that this evening, but more detail on your proposals on using the ARPA funds?
Yes, we plan to, and I'll jump in on the mayor just to tell you that there will be sections in each department that has requesting ARPA funds a separate section that will talk specifically about the amounts and the resources and the programs that we'll be asking you to approve. And I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
I would just add, as we indicated, we project kind of a 24 to 30 month investment of these ARPA funds. It may stretch longer than that, but they're meant for recovery and we need them now. That begins in July. We do expect to come to you in July with specific requests for a release investment of ARPA funds this calendar year. And then, as Mr. Underwood said, as you saw last budget, if you remember, there was a recover forward section identifying the particular use of those special funds so that we see them separately from the core budget, because these are not core budget funds. They're unusual, they're one time. So we would expect to give you that same kind of breakout in the 2022 budget. And between those two numbers for 21 and 22, we can do the math and see what we are proposing to keep available for 2023 and or beyond.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move to second round question or comments, starting with Councilmember Boland, if any.
I think I did have one. This is an idle question for now, but would the administration consider extending the housing voucher program for police to areas intended for annexation if annexation passes? In other words, there will be a couple of years before it takes effect. But if an officer moves to a house that will become part of the city, would the administration be willing to, would it be a budgetary impact to enable that early?
I think that's a good question. Certainly happy to look at that. Absolutely.
Okay. That's all I had listening to this conversation. I just want to say I'm very appreciative of my colleagues' questions and looking forward to really spending more time writing up questions to send to you later in the month. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Boland. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, President Sims. I'll ask this question to Mr. Underwood or the mayor. I really appreciate Mayor Hamilton's reference to spending some of the ARP money on some future housing initiatives. So I appreciate that. Thank you. So my theoretical question is something like this. If a council member or council members, since we have 9 really smart people, or maybe 8, don't want to include me here. If they wanted to initiate a new program, say it could be a pilot program or something that was we see in another city, and we would like to propose something be replicated in some manner. How does one, what would that process look like? And how do we go about that? And is that a possibility in the city of Bloomington that we could propose something like from our end and have a response and perhaps have it come to fruition at some point? And of course, I'm thinking and echoing the same thing that Councilmember Piedmont Smith is, something that has to do with housing and helping people out. So thank you. That would be my question.
The short answer, I think, yes. The short answer is yes. And I would encourage you particularly to look at the, put down whatever detail and ideas you have in that written sheet in the program you're talking about, the department it might be relevant to. Absolutely. We welcome proposals like that. We'll be, we get that from department heads. We get it from you. We've done that in the past, I think, too.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Anything else about that, Mr. Underwood? How do we go about that?
Well, as the mayor said, working in line with the administration, once an agreement had been made, then he would instruct me to put together a appropriation program for that, which we would bring back to you all and run it through the normal process of a public hearing and adoption, and then the funds would become available and be implemented.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Councilmember Scambolery.
I don't have any further questions this evening. I'll submit mine in writing. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Sandberg.
No other questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Flaherty.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I'll be following up with additional in writing, and we'll leave it at that for this evening. But appreciate the conversation. Another, I think, just a brief comment or two. Some things I'm interested in exploring. I think I think a number of us expressed some frustrations or just challenges in the budget process last year. For four of us, of course, it was new. And I think we're all trying to find ways to refine that and improve that and do things maybe a little differently, which is part of a new forum here and a new timeline and process. So I think we need to keep thinking about a lot of those things kind of as we move forward. And I'll probably have some questions, probably a fair amount of questions related to process and what the administration would like to see from us at various points, how we can plan for follow-up meetings to discuss various ideas and proposals and have some, some collaboration and compromise on those fronts. Another area of thought is I have a bit of a hard time sometimes thinking about longer term capital planning in our adopted goals, transportation plan, climate action plan, things like that, and how exactly those fit into the budget. We don't normally see those things in the budget, but of course they touch on a lot of priorities that council members may mention, for instance. So we may mention something and like to see it in the budget, but if there's a separate capital plan for that of some kind, that may be adequate as well, even though it doesn't manifest in the same way. And I briefly corresponded with, I think, Mr. Underwood about this at some point last year. It was fairly brief. I was asking for what sort of capital planning documents we had. And I think you sent a few things my way, which I was maybe hoping for more, but didn't have the bandwidth to dig in further at the time. So that's something I'd still like to explore a little more is what our capital replacement sort of liabilities look like and our capital planning looks like for some of our various adopted plans. And then additionally, I appreciate that President Sims mentioned, and this form has a place to, and this may have been Councilmember Scamboleri's idea. I don't know exactly where this originated. The idea of noting percentage or dollar increases or decreases in certain departments and flagging what that's for. And I think that's at least in part aimed at trying to balance some things, or saying if you want to see an increase in this of this amount here, ideally we could point to where something would decrease instead. And I think as a starting point, that's good. I think there may be other relevant pieces of the puzzle, though, including reversions, for instance, including kind of how much we subsidize various things at the city that are sort of classical user fee activities that we sort of give for a reduced cost or for free in some cases, and the appropriateness of that that won't always sort of manifest in the same way, as well as revenues that are related to those. So I think there's a number of ways to think about where money comes from for certain initiatives. And I guess I'm not quite sure yet if it's, I don't know if the expectation is that for any increase proposed by a council member, we will propose a corresponding decrease. And I guess if so, I'm a little uncomfortable with that because I think it's a little more complicated than that. And I'll just kind of leave it there. I look forward to more conversations to kind of talk about that aspect of some of these new things in our process. So thank you again for the presentations tonight. Look forward to moving forward from here.
Thank you, Councilmember Flaherty. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, thank you. I would like to know how much we still subsidize parking. So that's a question that I'll be submitting. I think Councilmember Flaherty touched on several other concerns with the way that some things are funded maybe from different pots of money, and whether the funds may be more flexible or more fungible than we have assumed for many years. And, like we always use this pot of money for paving and this part of money for bike lanes and this for that. I think it's worthwhile revisiting some of those assumptions and looking to see if we can instead use some capital funds and other funding sources to further our sustainability action plan, our transportation plan, and our climate action plan. Because really, we have to continue to shift away from single occupancy gasoline powered vehicles, and so a fresh look at how we use certain funds and what may be allowed to be done with them, I think is called for. So those are some transportation related issues that I'll be looking into. I also agree that I'm not sure if maybe Mayor Hamilton can speak to this briefly tonight, but the Excel document, the chart that we were given to give our feedback on, where it says, here's a proposal in a certain department that you might like to, give us an idea of what you might want to fund that's new, but then for each thing you want to fund that's new, how would you pay for it by deducting the same amount from another, project? I guess I agree with Councilmember Flaherty that it's not always cut and dried like that. And it's also difficult for those of us who don't micromanage departments to really understand how we could change the way things are done in order to fund new initiatives. So I don't know if Mr. Underwood or Mayor Hamilton can speak briefly to how much they expect from, like, how much accurate math they expect in that kind of worksheet.
It's your budget to pass or not pass. So we don't have a pay-go rule in city government. So I don't want you to interpret that, meaning if you have a great idea of how to spend money, don't share it unless you have a similar idea about how to save money. That's not what it's meant. It's just meant to encourage you to think about both. And sometimes people may have a view that we spend too much on certain things, regardless of wanting to use it somewhere else. They just may think we're overspending on certain programs or other things, so either way is fine. It's just encouraging you to think about both. And of course, ultimately it comes to you. We are required to pass balanced budgets, including our balances, however, our cash on hand. So ultimately it's up to the council to approve or not a proposal like that.
Well, now I can't say what I was going to say, because I would say, yeah, it's got to equal out, but no. That we didn't go into a lot of detail on the form to give you the ability to comment if you want to add a program or increase a program. If you have ideas on funding sources, certainly feel free to put those in there. And again, one of the things, and I'm more than happy to be included in the discussion about permissible uses of funds. That's something that we have to deal with on a daily basis, and we get audited every year for those very things. And sometimes the Board of Accounts doesn't necessarily agree with us on those. So it's not always fungible, to take money from one fund and particularly do a program that we wouldn't necessarily fund out of another. But we're happy to discuss those with you. And as the mayor said, we do have to present a balanced budget, but we're more than happy to hear ideas of things like subsidies, just subsidies, increase in revenues. We've proposed some of those in the past as well. And at the end of the day, it has to be a balanced budget. And the thing about it does include balances, but if you continue to dive into balances, we can look to one of our neighbors over in Owen County, if you've read that, where that's what they did. They continued to overspend and wiped out all their cash balances. So now they're having to restrict spending drastically to get back into a good stead with the Board of Accounts, who doesn't like to see negative numbers. So but we would be happy to hear all those things.
Let me just add to that, that spreadsheet is a template. If it's not comfortable for you, you'd rather do narratives, that's fine. It's just a suggestion. If you want to add, it's just a suggested template to use. So however you want to share the information, we'll look at it.
And obviously it was the controller that did that, because it's a spreadsheet, not a Word document. So I will take ownership and admit that was me. So
Now, for a balanced budget, are we allowed to use the surplus that we have in the general fund?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
You have to not spend more than you get in revenue and what you have on cash on hand.
Right.
That combination.
and again, wanting to keep, GFOA recommends at least 2 months worth of reserves. So we, if we take it below that, you're really going to make me get itchy. So
Don't want that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rallo.
Thank you. Well, I have some smaller questions, but maybe I'll dive deep here and just say, I think one potential, and I think we've talked about this before, means of reducing costs is in reducing organics out of our waste stream. And a modest proposal would be to distribute free composters to interested residents as a first step, because organics, of course, are bad for the atmosphere because they go to landfills and produce methane, but it's also probably the heaviest thing in our waste stream. So, and then this is a perpetual question that we used to ask in the past, but that was controlling our own waste stream and whether an analysis is necessary in the near future about reopening our landfill so that we're not beholden to a single monopoly hauler and subject to costs, as well as all the fossil fuels that are utilized in shipping it to Terre Haute. So that's an analysis I'd like to see sometime. Perhaps this budget, it might be premature too early, but this is something I think we need to discuss, and I think it's an important component, both in terms of cost and in terms of if we're serious about climate as well. Controller Underwood, do you have any comments on that?
Certainly is, and the mayor may want to jump in. Yeah, we're open to all those discussions. He has set up many task force to look at those types of things, and I'll let him really, he can be the man.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Councilmember Rallo. As you know, we do have this waste to energy review that's still going on. It's looking at best options. I do think I would just say, and you've got, of course, Representative Piedmont Smith is on the executive committee, but the solid waste management district is a key player that maybe we can, and they're doing some good analysis now on strategic planning. And I think in some ways in the past, that district has not looked at the city proper as part of the whole county and thinking about that whole waste stream and options. And I think there's some real opportunities to look at that entity, which is dedicated on reducing landfill use. And of course, they control the landfill. But I think those are really good questions and comments. And I don't know if he's gunning for your seat, Isabel, but no, I'm just kidding. We're very active. I think that's a good place to look.
Thank you. I do too.
Mr. Chair, you're muted.
Oh, thank you. I wonder why I was getting those looks. Thank you. Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Thanks. I don't have questions. I will just say thanks to the mayor for clarifying that we don't have to stick to that spreadsheet so very seriously. I mean, I understand it's encouraged, but that is useful that we can write some narratives because that's more my style. Also, thank you, Mr. Underwood, for making the spreadsheet, and to both of you for the presentation. I will just be following up with the questions in the spreadsheet.
Thank you. I see Councilmember Boland had his hand up. Councilmember Boland.
I did, because I didn't speak the first time. I thought it'd be okay to break in with one last question. Mr. Mayor, I heard you say to Councilmember Piedmont Smith that this is our budget. And I know you mean, I think you mean that council has to decide to vote it up or down. But I mean, I could interpret that to mean something else too, which is, it's always been my understanding that the city budget is formed by the mayor because the council does not have the ability to even move funds without cooperation of the executive. We can only cut funds. So, unless you're asking us to form the budget for each department, and as Councilmember Piedmont Smith said, we're not in a position to manage each department. That's not our role. But we're not like the county council. We're not forming the budget. Was your statement kind of an invitation to us to help you determine the budget, or is it simply you're hearing our preferences and you're going to take them into account as you form the budget? Do you follow my question?
I think I do. I think it was just a big open arms, our budget, and welcome your ideas. There's 9 of you, and you don't all, but we welcome the ideas. Of course, we know the way the state process works, and I have to put together a balanced budget that I present to you as we typically do. But I welcome your ideas on the budget that eventually you have to vote up or down and pass. I can't spend $1 without your appropriation.
Well, I appreciate that clarification. I just wanted to point out that if there's one area where the cooperation would be strongest, is if council, a majority of council would like to move money, whether it's cutting or adding, it's one thing, but just simply moving from one department to another is something worth thinking about. That it requires both of us to do. Anyway, I look forward to the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Boland. Do we have any other this evening questions, comments from council members? Okay, thank you. Before we move on, I have a comment. I just really want to say I do appreciate my colleagues' questions and comments as we begin and move forward in this budgeting process. I think it's very, very important, not only for us to do the budgeting, which will run our city, but the process. I think it's important in the area of transparency and thoroughness. And I too will submit questions and comments and priorities via written, like my colleagues. And that's the end of my comments. Final chance for comments or questions from my colleagues before we move on. Okay, now just before we do move on, one of the things that leadership, myself and Vice President Camilleri has proposed is after recess, I'll get it out, July 28th, that's a committee night. And at this point, we have nothing scheduled. And I was looking to find the will of our council members if we wanted to continue our budget discussion that evening, July 28th, in a committee night. And if that is affirmed, and I'll ask Mr. Lucas if a general consensus is okay, or if we need to vote on that. And if it is the will of this council to hold further discussions on that date, then we will, of course, invite the office of the mayor and any administration that he feels is appropriate. Mr. Lucas.
Thank you. I think if the council wishes to schedule a meeting for that date, it could do so tonight by motion. Certainly the president could also call for a special session on that date. So I think either option is open to you tonight.
Thank you. I believe we discussed it, and I think I'd rather do it in a committee setting as opposed to a special session setting. So going to our parliamentarian. I believe that's correct. I will entertain a motion to schedule continuing discussion on budgetary matters in the committee of the whole on July 28th at 6:30 p.m.
Sorry, another
Or
question or two.
if it's
okay.
proper. Oh, no, yes, you do. And later on, if it's proper, then yes, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, the first was, I don't think it matters too much, but we could handle this during the scheduling portion at the end of the evening. I'm not sure if it makes a difference. Second would be just a question for council staff. Do we already have a meeting noticed but not scheduled for that night? Is that right?
In the council's annual schedule, which was posted last December, we have a meeting scheduled for July 28th that at the moment would be a committee night.
Okay, and that's so the meeting, a meeting for that night is noticed and sort of earmarked as a committee night, but not it would still take a motion or the action of the president at this point to schedule.
Well, I think it depends on, again, what type of meeting you'd like to hold. I know President Sims has suggested simply holding a committee of the whole. I think that's an option, although there are limitations to the committee of the whole structure. One option might be to simply schedule a budget advance type meeting like you've held in past years that would allow for a budget discussion. So it wouldn't be a special session. It would simply be a meeting to further discuss the budget. And so that's also an option.
Sorry, this is probably something we could have hashed out a bit more in advance. My apologies for not talking through it with you, Mr. President. That type of meeting, what type of meeting of council would that be, Mr. Lucas?
Well, each year, again, in April, we've held a budget advance. It's simply it's a public meeting. It's an opportunity for council members and the administration to talk about budget priorities. It sounds like that's the type of meeting that you're envisioning. So
a looser format, more akin to a work session, but during a public meeting, during a time that would be more conducive to public view, noting that the committee of the whole itself has some limitations. For instance, only a couple of motions being in order, either to recommend something or to rise and report. Is that the?
Yes, that's correct.
Would that be amenable to you, Mr. President, to simply schedule a meeting for that night to further consider budget, the budget? I think also maybe Mayor Hamilton wanted to weigh in. So
yes, yes. If my preference is a committee night or committee meeting, is that what you're asking?
It'd be neither a special session nor a committee night if we just scheduled a meeting to have discussion on the budget. I was likening it more so to a work session or something like that. So the format would be looser and at your discretion to organize, but it would be at a time of evening that would be conducive to public viewing. I think Mr. Lucas's point, and I think I share it, is that the committee of the whole, only two motions, I believe, or three are in order in a committee of the whole meeting, which is to amend or recommend adoption or rise and report. It's just this is all fairly in the weeds and not all that important, I suppose. But perhaps just a budget meeting for that evening would be the easiest option.
Well, I think it is. Let me share my thoughts and we'll go to the mayor. My intent is that there will not be votes of legislation. It is just an opportunity to continue this conversation with our colleagues to give more time to be more transparent. That'll be after recess, so things will develop a little more, even though I don't believe that the administration would be prepared to give exacts even then, but to further discuss priorities and just make sure that we have good engagement with council colleagues. That was the intent. Mayor Hamilton, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, I appreciate that, and Mr. Underwood may want to weigh in as well. We of course welcome reviews and considerations of how to run the budget process as efficiently as we can. I want to be mindful that in the current schedule, we will be in front of you mid-July, 17th or so, with an appropriation ordinance for funds, and in, of course, August, we will be presenting the budget in great detail with extensive hearings with all of our department heads. I don't want an expectation to arise that in between those two, there would be a chance for detailed review of the budget. We are thick in the very heavy lifting of assembling a budget right during that time. And I don't think we welcome input at any time, but I think engaging in a kind of a back and forth, where are you on the budget? Where are you on this? I don't think would be appropriate from my end on that. We'll be kind of thick in the middle of trying to evaluate all that. So I guess in short answer, and if Mr. Underwood has anything he wants to add, we always welcome input between now and when the budget is finally done. I think I don't want to have an expectation that it will be kind of a preview of the August budget presentation, because it's really a lot of very intense, heavy lifting to assemble the budget that will be in the middle of at that time. And Mr. Underwood, I don't know if you want to add anything.
And if that is the expectation, I'll be happy to introduce you to your new controller who will be doing that for you, because it won't be me. No, the mayor said it's the July and August. I mean, we are working day and night to get you that budget, as soon as we can before the hearing. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. So we would not be prepared to go into great detail at that time, but always open to suggestions, questions, and recommendations.
Thank you. I think my comments, as I stated at the beginning of this, we may not have much more information, definitive information than we do tonight. So I don't think there was an expectation of back and forth. But I also want to make sure that from a council engagement standpoint, that we have another opportunity to just further discuss. There will be plenty of time between now and then to give more thought to priorities and maybe understand some different things. And that was the intent, more of a continuation of tonight. If that's so, I have no expectations of answers or trying to back anyone in a corner, just to be transparent and engage our council members. I see a hand from Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. If I just heard that correctly, I'm hearing that there really is not much point for us to have that kind of discussion on the 28th, that if we don't have that with the staff before then, we have missed our opportunity to be a part of the formation of what will be presented to us as the budget. So sounds to me like it may not be necessary to have any kind of a budget advance on the 28th. Our time to make our priorities known is through our spreadsheet or our narrative or whatever it is we're going to be presenting before July the 1st. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay, then I don't think we need it.
Thank you. Councilmember Boland.
Whether we need it or not, I would say that calling a special session gives the council more flexibility in whatever it would like to do, or whatever you, Mr. President, would like to do in that meeting. As Mr. Flaherty said, the committee of the whole gives us very few options, and it expects to have legislation referred to it. So I don't think it matters that it's a committee week. We have this year, last year, and several years before had to schedule special sessions on committee weeks. It's something we've done many times. It's not unusual, and you can set whatever agenda you want. So with respect to whether or not this should be the matter, I mean, I take Councilmember Sandberg's point, but I think that once the budget is presented to us at budget week, there's a whole lot less that count, because I mean, I think that I'm hearing from council members the desire to have some more input in the formation of the budget before it gets to the point where we can't change it as easily as the point I just made to the mayor. So I think that on balance, and we're certainly talking about balancing a budget, on balance, I think that I can see the benefit of such a meeting, and it would be good to have an opportunity to find out how the departments are doing, to further discuss ideas that were initiated tonight, and maybe to have a discussion among council members about priorities. So, I think it really depends on the kind of answers. I mean, are we going to get answers back from our questions that we submit by the end of the month before the budget is presented? That night would be an opportunity for us to hear some feedback from the administration about how they took our questions and what answers they might have to them. So that's it. Thank you.
I think, and I'll say this, and the mayor may comment, the expectations on getting responses from questions is as it has been in the past, and that comes after budget hearings where there are responses in written form. So again, my intent was to continue this conversation of budget related matters from an engagement standpoint, if that was the will of the council. But I also thought it was important to bring it to this council as opposed to me just scheduling it and say, this is what we're going to do. And I am fine. I appreciate Councilmember Sandberg's comments, but if it is the will of this council that is not something that we want to do, I am fine with that as well.
I appreciate both perspectives, and I thank you for the idea.
Mr. Hamilton.
Well, thank you. And I know you're letting me step in here. I appreciate it. Look, it almost sounds like a desire for a preview of the budget presentation, but we're just not able to do that. We are, we welcome the input, but we need it sooner, not later. We need the input now. We started in April. It's a long time. We welcome that input. We heard some tonight. We welcome more of that. But it is a huge job to assemble a responsible, balanced budget that we are in the middle of. So it's really too late at that point to try to give specific more input. We're in, we always welcome it, but I don't want you to think it's going to be kind of a preview of the August budget presentation, because we work really hard to get ready for that presentation, and that's what we will do. And we welcome input all through. But I wouldn't foresee a back and forth discussion in a meeting in late July. That's just I will lose my controller, I think, for that. So.
Thank you. Again, it was to get the temperature of the will of this council. And normal. Is that me? Thank you. And normally I would have done similar to a work session, just give us a sign of hands and then we'd have proceeded that way. But I want to do this decently and in order, which is why we're talking in this process. And again, I am fine if the will of this council says that's not a good time for that or not that important. Did I see your hand, Councilmember Spembler?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate this conversation, and I appreciate particularly Mayor and Controller Underwood managing our expectations about what a meeting in July could and could not be. So I'm being a little slow here. So if I'm understanding you correctly, the feedback you need, so we wish to emphasize increased spending on housing insecurity and programs related to that kind of feedback you need sooner rather than later. You need that before July 1st, correctly? And on July 28th, if I'm understanding correctly, you're also not going to have any specific dollar amounts from the state just yet. If I'm following the timetable that Controller Underwood gave us earlier, we don't even get estimated property tax caps until July 30th, correct? So given that we won't really have new financial information on revenue, and that our feedback on expenditures would be better off coming early, it seems to make sense that's what we ought to do. And it's June, whatever it is, June 2nd. I think that's a month for us to actually share our feedback with you and to move this forward. So I'm not sure a meeting on the 28th would help us move forward in a meaningful way. So I would just offer that thought. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a good and very valuable thought. And again, one of the reasons why not only to accommodate council members, some of the challenges on their schedule and plans. This is why we extended it from the 15th to submit questions until July 1st. And I do believe the administration is okay with that date, as close as it is. And again, if it's not the will of the council to do this on the 28th, and that's kind of what I'm hearing, I am fine with that. I just wanted to at least put it on the table to get to gauge the temperature of my colleagues. Councilmember Rollo. I'm sorry, hang on. Councilmember Boland, is your hand up? Or?
I just wanted to know if there was a motion on the table.
Not yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rollo.
Yes, just weighing in. First, I appreciate President Sims, your offer to have this debated. I think it's been useful to hear, and I agree with my colleagues. I don't think it's necessary to have that meeting on the 28th. We have time to submit our perspectives to the administration before that, and I think we have time to do that. I think it's not necessary to have that meeting. So,
okay, thank you. No, thank you very, very much. Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes, thanks. Given the sort of wide range of possibilities for a meeting like that, as well as some of the feelings among city staff and council members for a possible meeting, then I'll just note also that it's not too late either for us to schedule something at our next regular session before recess in 2 weeks. So if further conversations and discussion led to a desire for a meeting among some folks, or at least a motion, we could consider it then. I appreciate the feedback from the mayor and the controller and my colleagues. I'm still kind of working through how we're doing things differently this year. And I do have a few concerns about not holding a meeting, just because this mayoral report and some questions and comments from council members tonight was a bit different than the previous budget advance we've had in years past in April. It's actually less lead up time to the budget, which is maybe one challenge that we need to think about and address going forward in future years. But second, I think it was less of an opportunity than I've seen in the past for a public discussion of council member priorities. And I think there's value in that. And I think I still think that a meeting on the 28th of July could help us to maybe review and clarify answers to questions that were submitted July 1, if we have answers to those at that point, as well as maybe as a body talking through some of our different priorities that while submitted individually will be made available publicly. So those will be available in written form, and we could have a conversation as a council, even if there's not a lot of new content, say from the mayor or the controller, we could have a conversation publicly as a council about various priorities where there's overlap, where there's disagreement, and maybe work through some of those things in a public way that might have a benefit for the public and also have a benefit for us in thinking about basically as we lead into the August budget hearings, and if we feel like we've coalesced around some things and whether or not those are then reflected in the August budget. So I think there might still be value in it. Maybe it's of a different format than what we did tonight, and also not as much back and forth with administration. But I think that's something we can continue to talk about and think about and don't necessarily need to schedule tonight. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Boland.
Last thought is, I think that there's no reason why we couldn't also schedule a special session as late as the regular session of July 21st. So something to keep in mind, that we have scheduled meetings on shorter notice than that. But I think there's an opportunity that night to schedule a special session if by then there is a will among members to have such a discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a good choice. And it was something I'm sure there'll be a discussion with council leadership on scheduling. There was just an attempt tonight again to ensure that council members felt engaged, in particular, or further engaged, understanding that when we normally would have talked about this, that the budget advance meeting, we really used it for the ARPA funding presentation and discussion. So again, was just trying to get the will of the council. And it seems to me that the majority of the council feels that meeting on the 28th is probably not necessary. And as I stated earlier, I'm fine with that. I'm just trying to gauge the will of the council in this matter. Councilmember Boland, is your hand up again? No, okay. So, Mr. Lucas, hearing from my colleagues, I am fine with, we never had a motion or anything. So this discussion, I think, has even been helpful. So I'm fine with withdrawing that as of tonight, and have further discussions in future scheduling meetings. Of course, I'll do due diligence as best I can, and Council or Vice President Scambolari, to make sure our colleagues are involved in part of that planning and the need for that continuation of discussions. So without further ado, what I was suggesting is now off the table unless there's any more comments or questions. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Underwood, for the presentation and the discussion. Thank you. And now thank you. And now we will move on to Bloomington Arts Commission's annual report. I do believe I saw Mr. Starowich here to present.
Good evening, everyone. Actually, Bryony, the chair of the Arts Commission, will be presenting. There she is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Hello, Ms. Gomez.
Good evening. How
sorry.
is everybody doing today?
Good.
I will go ahead and start sharing my screen, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity to share with you tonight. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Bryony Gomez Palacio, and while I was born and raised in Mexico City, today I am happy to call Bloomington my home. And I thoroughly enjoy serving as chair to the Bloomington Arts Commission, where I get to volunteer with a group of deeply invested commissioners, all of whom love and value the arts. During this challenging year, we devoted many a Zoom session to updating and revising our strategic plan. While this was on our scheduled docket, the challenges we have all faced since March of last year really needed to be addressed. We needed to evaluate our impact, our goals, and our role within and for the creative community of Bloomington.
Excuse me, I just got a note. Are you planning to screen share while you were presenting, or?
Is it not sharing?
No.
Oh, I'm so sorry here. Can you see my
Yes.
screen now?
Yes, we
Okay.
can.
Sorry about that. I will just continue. We established that at our fundamental core, we are here to connect, guide, and enable, be it between city and citizens, creative entities, artistic groups, individual artists. The list goes on. We can't fix everything, but we can and will collaborate towards the greater good of the arts in Bloomington. Our vision is for an energized, interdisciplinary cultural community that supports the creative activities of local artists and patrons of the arts. Our mission is to provide leadership by and for the City of Bloomington to support and promote the arts and artists, while serving as liaison between the government, artists, arts organizations, and the public. As commissioners, we believe in the intrinsic value of the arts and their integration into the everyday, the principles of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility at all times, community collaborations, alliances, and partnerships towards the active enrichment of our community. Oh my. One of the most important tasks that you have assigned to us is to oversee the city's percent of the arts. In the last 2 years, since we last met, we have commissioned several exciting projects. For our first international commission, a sculpture by Stefan Ries is in the works for the Trades District Plaza, further elevating Bloomington as a cultural destination well beyond our borders. Almost completed, you can view the historically influenced work by Indianapolis-based T3 at Switchard Park. A dedication event will take place early this summer. Living up to our updated core values, the work by Indianapolis-based Project One for the 4th Street Garage is a testament of collaboration across industries where the art and the functionality and needs of the building meet to overlap in the final work titled Urban Fabric. Esteban Garcia, a Colombian-born and Indiana-based artist and educator, has been conducting workshops and gathering submissions from Bloomingtonians to incorporate in his Aurora project in the recently completed Trades Garage. We started 2020 like most of you, following our to-do list and launching the annual grants for the arts program. We quickly realized that we needed to adjust our plans and respond to the challenges faced by our creative community as the pandemic established itself. Instead of focusing on project or operational support, we shifted to simply helping arts organizations remain viable, even when shuttered. With your generous contribution of one-time additional funds, we divided the program into 2 cycles. In the spring, we were able to help our arts organizations navigate the early months of the pandemic as they restructured programming and adjusted to the circumstances. In the fall, we focused on enabling stability while paying special attention to demonstrated pandemic-related creativity, resiliency, and community engagement. In short, during 2020, we were able to distribute $80,800 to 26 organizations, thanks to the response by the city and the Bloomington Urban Enterprise Association. These funds were utilized to stay afloat, create online programming, and in several instances, it led various groups in our community to collaborate with each other. We are extremely thankful for your ongoing support as we enter 2021 with a robust grant cycle totaling $100,000. This spring, we had a total of 33 applications that have now been reviewed by a panel of commissioners alongside members of our community. We will be announcing the outcome in the next couple of weeks, and I'm excited to share that we are back to funding creative projects alongside operational needs. A second grant cycle will take place in the fall with the remaining funding, and we are very excited to introduce a new category that will focus on emerging artists, one that will help new voices learn about acquiring grants, allowing them to grow through experience and begin building a public portfolio. While the Percenta for the Arts and our grants program are at the core of our duties, we have worked on other areas as well. I will not dive into all of them, but I do want to highlight a few. A public-private partnership with a graduate hotel resulted in a commission by rising art star Nina Chanel Abney. We consider this an important addition to the public art sphere, as it showcases the work of a Black queer female artist. It was installed by Library Street Collective, whose founder is an IU grad, and included an arts workshop for local children. With this project, we highlighted inclusion, local connection, and community engagement. Led by the Banneker Advisory Council and Banneker staff, we assisted staff, volunteers, and community members through the process of 2 street murals. We greatly appreciate the efforts of artists Christina Elam and Raheem Elmore for their important contributions to the effort. Up next, we will be assisting the Near West Side neighborhood on a new mural thanks to a Hand Neighborhood Improvement Grant, further connecting, guiding, and enabling projects within our city. Led by Lucas Brown, Comprehensive Design offered a semester-long course allowing students to go through a traditional public art process, responding to a specific site, presenting to various boards and commissions, experiencing fabrication and installation. This particular project plots carbon emissions while acting as a tree protector. Sadly, due to a very hungry deer, we are now working on replacing this tree. Through the BEAD, city staff, and the BAC, we have successfully created a project that encompasses Art Road 46 and a healthy exchange between the Bloomington and Columbus cultural districts. Traditionally, all that has historically existed between Columbus, Brown County, and Bloomington has been a landing page on the Visit Bloomington site. Through a unique partnership with Sycamore Land Trust, the Paper Pavilion exhibition fostered a healthy exchange between the three communities and connected 9 artists across the state of Indiana. During the height of the pandemic, we put a variety of artists, writers, and photographers to work. With support from the Columbus Area Arts Council and FAR staff, virtual tours and programming were available to the public, alongside safe viewing from gallery windows. The project was initially supported by the Columbus Museum of Art and Design and Indiana Arts Commission Cultural District grants, in which BEAD was the first applicant in their grant program to foster an exchange between the cities. It's very easy for the BAC to focus on the visual arts. That's how Arts Commission started. But we know how vital performing arts, spoken word, dance, and other live and in-person cultural events are to this community. The BCT turns 100 next year, 100, and it needs all the love that it can get. And as recently announced, the Waldron is getting a new chance at life. We stand behind the task force recommendations and Mayor Hamilton's commitment to the Waldron over the next few years. We ask that you provide the necessary funding to keep these buildings going as cultural groups seek to reopen. Additionally, we strongly encourage you to provide ongoing financial support for the years to come. Nobody, and I think we can agree, nobody likes to think of the boring stuff like the routine maintenance and capital improvements, but they are essential to the ongoing safety of the buildings, the performers, and all ticket holders. The ecosystem these two buildings offer to our arts and culture sector are at the heart of our community. As we begin to implement our updated strategic plan, we're establishing our social media presence to better connect and communicate with our community. Throughout this presentation, you have met Mara, our youngest Instagram ambassador. We're holding quarterly meetings between the Bloomington Arts Commission, Arts Alliance of Greater Bloomington, and Arts Forward Bloomington. Clear communication and collaboration between the groups will make our cultural contributions stronger. We are developing a robust toolkit that will further inform, enable, and engage the public with public art options. We want to make public art accessible to more members of our community. We have started reviewing areas in our city that are lacking in public art, and will be researching and proposing options. We are looking to establish working relationships with other city-based commissions where the arts and culture sector can assist in their missions. Additionally, we will be launching a topic-based recurring community hour to connect, guide, and enable growth and collaboration within our arts community. There is more, but I want to make sure that I have time to answer any questions that you might have. But before I bid you goodnight, I would like to take a moment to express our deepest gratitude to Mayor Hamilton, the staff in the office of the mayor, and each member tonight of the City Council. You are all willing to listen and dialogue with us. I would also like to show my appreciation for city staff from countless departments who are there to support and guide us every step of the way. And a special call out to the Bloomington Urban Enterprise Association for their support and partnership. And every intern from the O'Neill Service Corps team that has been placed in our path. They are an invaluable source to our success. Tonight, we thank you for your support since the inception of the Bloomington Arts Commission in 1983. The combined efforts of your work and that of the Commission have created a thriving cultural sector in our county. We look forward to the challenges ahead as we join forces to rebuild and reopen. I now welcome your questions.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much, Brittany Gomez Palacio. Thank you for the report. We'll go to our council members. Does anyone have any questions for Council Member Scambolari?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Gomez Palacio, thank you for the report. Thank you for persevering during a remarkable year. Two things in particular I want to offer kudos on. One is just the sheer emphasis on partnerships with FAR, and with a 422 gallery, and not just locally, but regionally. So thank you for bringing that to our attention as well. Big props on the Abney mural. I've always loved that ever since that went in. The one question I have, I was really interested to hear what you had to say about a bit more focused support for emerging artists. I know what emerging means in my head, but could you talk more about how those individuals or groups will be identified and cultivated?
Yes, we are actually drafting all of the guidelines that will help us identify what it means to be truly an emerging artist. But overall, we're talking about smaller grants because in a way you're taking a chance on somebody who does not have a proven record, who does not have a public portfolio of artwork. But we need to be make art and funding available to these artists so that they can grow, so that we can foster a whole new generation that will add art to our public art to our community, and then go out there into the world and take the Bloomington name and add art everywhere else. But everybody needs that first chance, right? We all need somebody to believe in us, and that's really what we're striving to do with that, with smaller funding that will allow people to just take a chance and learn from the process.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any further questions from council? Okay, Ms. Gomez Palacio and Mr. Starwich, thank you very much for the presentation.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you. We will now move to the, thank you. We will now move to the annual tax abatement report. And I do believe we have the presenter present.
Hi, everyone. Thanks
Smith,
for, I'm great. Tax abatement's not quite as exciting as visual art, but very important. And I'm happy to be here to speak about them tonight. So I'll go ahead and share screen if that's okay.
Yes.
All right, can you see?
Sure can, thank you.
Okay, great. I'm Jane Cooper-Smith, Assistant Director for Small Business Development in the Department of Economic and Sustainable Development for the city. Thanks for the opportunity to provide the city's annual tax abatement compliance report for 2020. As you may remember, ESD completed its Economic Development Commission activity reporting requirement this past January. However, I also summarize EDC activity at the end of this presentation for your information. This year, ESD is making this presentation in a different order than normal. Typically, the clerk's office receives all active CF1s, and then within 45 days of that receipt, city staff provides a compliance report first to the EDC and then to Common Council. However, this year, because of the receipt of the first CF1 being so early, we are obligated to provide the abatement compliance report in advance of the next EDC meeting in order to meet our statutory deadline. So I will present this report to you this evening and then to the Economic Development Commission next Wednesday. As a reminder, tax abatements are a significant tool for economic development, which are reviewed by staff, recommended by the Economic Development Commission, approved by Common Council, and administered by the county. The general standards were updated in 2021 to formalize the city's commitment to supporting affordable housing developments. City of Bloomington tax abatement review criteria require capital investment as an enhancement to the tax base, in addition to either an increase in full-time permanent living wage jobs, a significant increase in wages, or the creation of affordable housing units. The evaluative criteria were also updated in 2021 to reference current and future planning documents that relate to quality of life and sustainability, affordable housing, community service, and community character. Tax abatements are typically phased in and reduce tax liability on the increase in assessed value with terms that range from 1 to 10 years. Each schedule of abatement is customized for each project And those schedules are included in the resolution approving the tax abatement. And I learned from council last week that that was not the case before 2013, but it is now, and for all the abatements, sorry, that's my dog, that will come before council going forward. To summarize the authorization process for new abatements, ESD receives an application for abatement along with the state form SB1, the statement of benefits. ESD staff reviews the application and makes a recommendation to the Economic Development Commission, which will include the approval of an economic revitalization area and an abatement term and schedule. If approved, ESD brings EDC's formal recommendation to the Common Council for a designating resolution and a public hearing, which we will be participating in later this evening for the property at 1730 South Walnut. Annual reporting requirements demand that city staff compare estimated benefits from the SB1 forms to actual benefits on the state's CF1 forms and present those findings to both EDC and Common Council. So this is why we're here this evening. So here we can kind of get into the nitty gritty. This slide compares estimated economic impacts in the left-hand column with actual new investment in the right-hand column. This slide serves as a good summary of the abatement activity. I note that the totals of actual new investment for commercial real estate and commercial personal property are low because Catalent will not have its final investment numbers until it concludes its projects in November 2021. However, Catalent requested to activate their abatement this year, so we've included them in the SB1 proposed new investment figures. City staff estimates that with the final investment numbers, actual new investment column will meet or exceed the total from the proposed new investment column on the left. This slide translates economic impacts into jobs created, jobs retained, and related salary figures. As you can see, total proposed new full-time permanent living wage jobs for all active SB1s were 337, with total proposed new salaries of $18,314,362. Actual new jobs dwarf this estimate at 1,126 jobs, with actual new salaries of $55,756,229. Total new and retained jobs are calculated at 2016. Staff reduced this number from the total reported on CF1s because Catalent uses the same total employment figure for each of its 3 abatements, which, although technically correct as it relates to the fields in the CF1s, would result in over-reporting if we viewed those numbers in sum or just used the total numbers. So we meted them out per abatement and then included the total ones. Conclusions that can be drawn from this slide are that Bloomington has seen a massive increase in employment relating to growth at Catalent specifically, although actual new salaries are slightly lower than what was predicted. Here we see a summary of the increase in assessed value, which is an indicator of the future increase in the tax base. That is, the city is abating a portion of this increase in assessed value, but because each abatement is limited to a 10-year term, we know that ultimately these abatements will spur an increase in the tax base. So the total increase in assessed value is $78,621,374. And so now I'll point to a few representative projects that are included in the packet this evening. And I'll be happy to take any questions at the end of the presentation if you would like to go back and look at anything else specifically. So the first one I'd like to point out is in its first year. Southern Knoll is an abatement on residential real estate improvements. They moved residents in during the pandemic in 2020 and have had full occupancy ever since. This development is off of 3rd Street, adjacent to Rose Hill Cemetery on the near west side. It includes 31 units of affordable housing, 7 of which are set aside as permanent supportive housing, and 7 of which are set aside for persons living with developmental disabilities. Although this abatement is required by the state to report on estimated and new jobs and salaries, Bloomington's net gain with this project is affordable housing units. This abatement is in year 1 at a rate of 98%, and Milestone's investment in Southern Knoll exceeded its estimate. So staff finds this project in substantial compliance. Sorry, the next one I wanted to talk about was Urban Station. This is, of course, a property everyone's visited for ice cream at the Chocolate Mousse. Urban Station represents an abatement for mixed-use real estate property improvements. Actual new investment was $3 million more than estimated at $14.5 million. Urban Station estimated that it would retain 10 jobs and create 5. It actually ended up retaining 4 jobs and creating 4 jobs. However, the new and retained salaries were slightly higher than anticipated at an average of $37,500 per job. The property owner also guarantees 10 units will remain at workforce housing rates for 99 years. This abatement has a 10-year term with a decreasing scale. It is in year 4 at 85%, but will drop after year 5 to from 80% to 30%. So it's slowly been decreasing, and then we'll have a significant drop. And staff also finds this property to be in substantial compliance. And then on the commercial side, I thought we could look at the original Cook Pharmaca DBA Catalent personal property abatement. This abatement derives from Resolution 1506. It is a term of 10 years at a flat rate of 70%. Resolution 1506 was approved before Catalent purchased Cook Pharmaca. It abates personal property improvements in support of job creation. Actual new investment trumps estimated investment by over $6 million. The estimated new jobs field doesn't reflect the incredible growth that Catalent has seen over the last several years. Therefore, actual new employees came in at 1,167 more jobs than the 70 that were anticipated. Similarly, actual new salaries came in much higher than the estimate. This abatement has been an important tool to keep high quality employment in Bloomington's city center. This abatement is in year 3. And then projects in progress. The only one that's formally in progress is the one that you all will be hearing about and discussing later on tonight for Real America at 1730 South Walnut. This is a real property abatement in service of affordable housing. And I presented all the information here for the packet, but you will talk about this in detail later. And then finally, the remainder of the presentation summarizes other 2020 and 21 activity from the EDC. Sorry, no new abatements were recommended during 2020. EDC amended and approved updated abatement guidelines in December. Those were approved by Bloomington Common Council in January. EDC did not issue any new bond inducements in 2020. However, City Council authorized economic development bonds for the renovation of Walnut Woods and Reverend Butler Apartments. The total amount authorized was up to $11 million. And those bonds were authorized by the City Council in 2002. Ordinance 2002, sorry. And then just 2 kind of project details from the last year. I wanted to note that Limestone Crossing, which received final approval in late 2019 for revenue bonds to facilitate the rehabilitation of 208 units at 60% AMI, were completed and passed their final inspection last Friday. So that was a big milestone. And then an update on the BHA Walnut Woods and Reverend Butler projects. BHA reports that 65% of Walnut Woods Reverend Butler renovations are complete. 27% of the project construction budget has been awarded to women or minority business enterprises. And all renovations are estimated to be complete by December 2021. So I think that's it for the presentation, and I'd be very happy to take any questions that you all may have.
Thank you for clearing the screen. I appreciate that presentation, Ms. Cooper Smith. Okay, we'll go to council for questions. Council Member Rollo and then Council Member Piedmont Smith.
Thank you, Ms. Cooper Smith, for that presentation. I wanted to ask about the urban station project, which you said came into substantial compliance, although their estimated job increase was, or retention was 10, and they failed to meet that, only had 4, and then expected to add, I think, 5, and only added 4. Was this the chocolate mousse in particular? Is that what the employer was? Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I think actually what I'll do is put Alex Crowley in the hot seat if possible, because when that abatement came on, it predated my tenure in ESD. So oh, there he is, magically appeared. Alex, do you recall the details of that?
I think the employment on that actually was going to be within the complex, but this is one of the motivations for revisiting the abatement guidelines, because the motivation for the urban station tax abatement was really the affordable housing component, and it was always a little messed up to try to force fit an employment metric onto a project that was really approved for tax abatement for something completely different. So, in our judgment, while certainly they did not meet the employment metric, they did meet the real premise for the tax abatement, and that's why we made the judgment that this was in compliance.
I see. Well, thanks for that clarification. I think that's all I've got. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Rollo. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Cooper Smith. I have a few questions. First of all, on the Southern Knoll Milestone Ventures project, the actual new salaries is only $14,731 for one FTE, which is surely not a living wage for a 40-hour-a-week position. So could you explain that a little better, please?
Yeah, so I think that they have 2 part-time jobs, and I think they're reporting them as one FTE. But this is, again, the same issue that Alex was talking about with Urban Station, where these are maintenance positions, and they are relevant in that they're jobs that are added for these projects. So they do need to be reported, but they aren't the high-quality full-time permanent living wage jobs that we're really looking at as the drivers of our decision-making for the abatement period. So this abatement is, again, an affordable housing project. And that's really what what city staff saw as the benefit here. But because we have to comply with the state forms, each property owner has to complete the state forms exactly as they're presented, and the state forms don't request reporting on affordable units. They only request reporting on the investment and the job creation. So that said, I take your point that this is not a high quality, job that we want to be really focusing on.
Well, my concern is that it wouldn't meet the requirements of our own living wage ordinance, which these entities are required to meet because they receive an abatement. So does anybody check on that?
I would be happy to check on that, but again, I think that this is just an issue with the form. I think this is likely they're reporting exactly what they paid the person that was, in this role, but I suspect that it's not a 40-hour a week, 52 weeks a year. I mean, it couldn't be. So, but if the council would like details on that, I'm certainly happy to look into that and report out on it via email.
Yes, please.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Councilmember Pete Smith. Any further questions from council? Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. Ms. Cooper Smith, how does the abatement rates, how are the abatement rates determined? What goes into that? I noticed that some rates are, higher and some are lower. How does that work?
Mm-hmm. I think that those schedules of abatement are created by ESD and the Office of Legal Counsel and recommended to the Economic Development Commission. So, it's several individuals that are looking at this together. I think that they are usually just a reflection of the quality. It's what are we getting in exchange for this community investment, right? Are we getting a high volume of jobs? Are we getting a high volume of affordable units? Are we abating all of the units on a property, or, are only 50% of the units in that property able to be considered for abatement? And then,
So it ends up being somewhat of a negotiation between the entity and your office and the legal counsel and everybody involved.
Yeah, and I see Alex has put his camera on, but I would also say that we've run a pretty tight defense on the city's resources. So, we're looking carefully at what is on the line and what we can get in exchange for any tax dollars that will not be received in exchange.
I think the abatements have a great place to be a great tool. I just wondered what went into the rates being, one way or another. Yeah. Did you want to say something, Mr. Crowley?
Well, I can just jump in a little bit. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
One thing, and it's I'll talk a little bit more about it in the next presentation, the tax abatement presentation. But the abatement is one part of a suite of local incentives that we can put on the table. An abatement, typically offsets operating costs, which are sometimes important to developers. But if you recall, there's also housing development fund, there are home dollars, there's land value in the case of those places where we actually have that land value to put on the table. So what also affects the schedule is how much else is happening, what other tools are we putting in play, and then what does that leave? And as I'll speak to later on, we are trying to normalize all of that across the number of affordable units being delivered by a given project in this case. So we do try to zero in on a cumulative value by unit, per unit, and that will dictate also what the abatement schedule might look like.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Smith. Any further questions from council? Councilmember Pete Smith.
Yes, since several of these do focus on affordable housing, I was hoping that that you, Ms. Cooper Smith or Mr. Crowley, could review for us how the city follows up and makes sure that, for example, at Union at Crescent, that at least 70% of the units are allocated to households with incomes at or below 60% of area median income. How do we verify that?
Alex, I would pass to you on that.
That's done with Hans help. So the hand department becomes involved in that. So we do require that there's a follow-up certification of that.
How frequently is that checked? Is that annual or?
I think it's annual. We can confirm that, but I'm pretty sure that's an annual process. But I'll double check that and we'll confirm that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Piedmont Smith. Any other questions from council? Okay, hearing none, then we will go to the public for comments. Councilmember Flaherty.
Just a note that this is a report from Office of the Mayor, which we don't typically go to public comment on. Although granted, this is a bit of a different than some reports, in that I believe we may consider a motion tonight to accept the report. So I'm not sure if that was the motivation for the president or.
Yes, that is my true and only motivation. Thank you, Councilmember Flaherty, but I will defer to Councilmember Lucas as part of the process that ultimately we may consider a motion to approve. Mr. Lucas.
Yes, and I believe in past years, the council has entertained public comment on this item for exactly the reason that you just stated, that the council has again typically entertained a motion to approve the report, given that the council does have the option to move towards rescinding the abatements. So I think that's the motivation.
Great, thank you both.
Thank you, Councilmember Flaherty. Okay, seeing no more comments, we'll now move to public comments on this annual tax abatement report. If anyone would care to make a public comment, please indicate by using your raise hand function in Zoom, or you can send us a message in chat indicating your intent to make a comment. Mr. Lucas, is that the only hand that we see?
I see one raised hand at the moment, yes.
Okay.
And that is Greg Alexander, who should be able to comment.
Hi, awesome. Thank you. My name is Greg Alexander. I just wanted to add to the record, just to recognize that another service that the city offered to Urban Station to facilitate that development is we gave them the sidewalk and the bike lane in front of that construction site for a little over a year that ended just a year ago. I just figure that that's important. That's a real valuable thing that we gave them that I would have used, but I couldn't because the construction workers were using it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander, for your comments. Do we have anyone else, Mr. Lucas?
Not that I see, no.
Okay. Seeing none, we'll go back to council for final or further comments and or questions. Okay, seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the annual tax abatement report. Councilmember Flaherty.
I move we approve the annual tax abatement report.
And I'll second.
Thank you. It's been properly moved in second. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Scambolery,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Flaherty.
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Sandberg, I'm sorry,
Yes.
yes. Rollo
Yes.
and Volin.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That motion passes 9-0. Thank you very much, Ms. Cooper Smith, you and Mr. Crowley. And thank you. We'll look for more details in the next report. But I hope we have that discussion well before then and a year from now. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks.
All right, as far as reports, we're now moving down to council committees. Do we have any reports regarding council committees this evening? Okay, seeing none, we will now go to public comment. And this period is for items not on tonight's agenda. And again, we will ask that if you care to public speak, please indicate by using the raise hand function, or you can send us a notice, the meeting host a notice through chat indicating your intent to speak. How many do you see, Mr. Lucas?
Just one at the moment.
Just one at the moment. Okay. We'll sing one. You can unmute Mr. Alexander. He'll have 5 minutes. Up to 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. My name is Greg Alexander again. I have a visual aid I hope might come on in a little bit. There's a lot to unpack in this picture. Thank you so much, Mr. Lucas. So the location here is the east sidewalk on North Walnut. It's about a block north of 17th Street. On the right side of the photo, behind the scooter, there is a sidewalk that is contiguous to the south for miles. It's actually pretty good. Okay, but on the left side, ahead of the scooter, there's a gap. You can see it. It's a small gap, only about 80 feet long. This gap is, it's 1,000 feet south of the huge new student development at 1800 North Walnut that this council approved, I think, back in 2019. That project was recommended by staff specifically because of the pedestrian connectivity in the area. And it does actually include some funding to fill in off-site gaps, but not this gap as far as I can tell. This one is south of 19th Street. Residents there will use this sidewalk. They will traverse that gap. You don't have to take my word for it that there aren't alternative pedestrian routes that are more attractive, because you can see the bare dirt and gravel path made by the many people who walk through this gap every day. They keep the grass down with their feet, and you can see that in the photo. The scooter's placement also tells a pretty clear story. They were going along and then they met the sidewalk gap and they abandoned the scooter. Presumably they continued on foot after that. Thank God they noticed the sidewalk gap, or they would have had a little disaster there. Probably would have taken a blow to the head if they rode the scooter off the end of the sidewalk. You can just imagine what that would be like. But then there's another question. Why were they riding the scooter on the sidewalk when there's a bike lane right there? You know, if you're designing bike infrastructure for someone like me, you're wasting our money. I'm experienced, determined, fearless. If you want to move the needle, you really have to design bike infrastructure for naive users, people who will only bike if it's safe and convenient. There's a lot more of them than there are of me, and they really can be persuaded with good infrastructure. And people on e-scooters are exactly the archetype of that kind of person. You can see clear as day, this naive two-wheel transportation user did not feel safe in that bike lane. They didn't even consider it an option. Just intuitively looking at that street, they rejected the bike lane. Now, as someone who has some familiarity with transportation engineering and safety, I happen to completely agree with that naive assessment. The speed limit is 40 miles an hour. High speeds, high volumes, too wide car lanes, large radius turns into the driveways and side streets. It really has it all. This road is a safety disaster for cyclists. It is built like a highway. The bike lane is just a strip of paint. It won't keep you safe. My choice, I avoid that road like the plague. I pick a different route. Even when I'm a mile away, I'm already thinking, how can I avoid biking on Walnut? What I'm telling you is that the bike lane is a crappy piece of transportation infrastructure and is only worth anything at all as a tiny increment of traffic calming, and that it encourages drivers to slow down just a little bit because the road doesn't quite seem as wide as if it wasn't there. But that's just my opinion. Does city government value this bike lane? Well, for that 1800 North Walnut project, the Board of Public Works received a request to close the bike lane for 2 whole years from August 2020 to August 2022. No detour, no traffic calming, no warning sign, no nothing, just now you have a bike lane and now you don't. Just go ahead and merge in with 40-mile-an-hour traffic. Screw you, cyclists. For 2 years. And you know what? The Board of Public Works said, that's fine with us. The Board of Public Works had absolutely no respect for that bike lane, considered it to be just as valueless as the naive scooter user did. And I tell you, the engineers that designed that bike lane didn't show it any more respect than that either. They knew, you know, you don't have to take my word for it. Ask the engineers. They knew that in order to make a safe or attractive bike lane, you have to slow down traffic. It's literally written in a book. You have to slow down the cars or it won't be a safe bike lane. They decided not to do that. They decided that 40-mile-an-hour car traffic on this highway is more important than the safety of cyclists. So now we're adding 800 some bedrooms on North Walnut based on the false claim that it has good bike and ped transportation options. But we haven't done that crucial step yet of demanding excellence in our transportation engineering. Students are going to be living there in just a year. We should demand excellence. The engineers will always know that bike and ped transportation is just an afterthought for as long as the most basic requirement of a comprehensive sidewalk network is a massive unfunded mandate. Fund sidewalks. Give them a reason to believe that you think we might someday reach that bare minimum of having a sidewalk transportation network, and then ask them what it'll take to get to excellence. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Alexander. Do we have anyone else, Mr. Lucas?
I don't believe so, no.